Hello, my name is Richelle Flanagan. I'm a registered dietitian from Dublin, Ireland. I'm a WPC ambassador and I was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease 4 years ago. I'm delighted to be talking to you today about living optimally with Parkinson's through diet and nutrition. I'm going to talk to you about my top 10 tips based on my lived experience and also my research into diet and Parkinson's. My first tip is to ask for a referral to a speech and language therapist. I myself had problems with a sensation of wanting to clear my throat all the time, as if I had something stuck in my throat. And I spent a lot of money and time trying to sort this out. I thought it was to do with the Parkinson's, but I was dismissed wherever I went. Until that is, I went to the WPC Congress in Kyoto in 2019, where I heard a Japanese speech and language therapist speak about swallow. And she advised that people should get a swallow assessment upon diagnosis. When I mentioned my symptoms, many people in the audience had the same symptoms, and she advised that an assessment is important. So I asked for an assessment when I went back to Ireland from a speech and language therapist, and I got a video fluoroscopy, which is a scan of your swallow. It did in fact show that I had a slowness of movement from the front of my mouth to the back of my mouth, and that my swallow was that of a 65-year-old and not a 47-year-old. This was quite a shock. But I've been working with my speech and language therapist with expiratory muscle training to help with my swallow to keep it strong. Because a lot of people with Parkinson's develop dysphagia, which is basically swallowing issues where they choke on fluid and foods. And up to 80% of people with Parkinson's don't realize they have swallow issues. And it's about prevention, getting in early to help strengthen our muscles to slow dysphagia from appearing. One of the issues with dysphagia is that you can end up with your tablets stuck in the back of your mouth or in your throat, and they don't get down into your stomach and to your intestines where they need to be absorbed into your bloodstream to get to your brain. The other reason is that dysphagia can put people off eating a wide range of foods, and this can lead to weight loss, which can lead to worsening of symptoms and perhaps a hastening of progression. My top tip number 2 is to make sure you take your levodopa tablet half an hour to an hour before meals or an hour to 2 hours after meals. The reason for this is that your tablet has to travel through your stomach to get to your intestines. And if you have a very large meal that is high in fat and high in meats, basically these foods can slow down the emptying of your stomach, which means that this little tablet can stay stuck in your stomach and doesn't get to your intestine where it needs to get to be absorbed. So you don't get as much of your levodopa to your brain on time, which means that your symptoms aren't as well controlled. The other reason is that protein foods like your meats break down to amino acids, and these amino acids compete with your levodopa to get across your gut into your blood. So again, that can cause a slowing of your levodopa getting to your brain on time, which means that your symptoms are not as well controlled. This leads me on to top tip number 3, which is to manage your bowel movements regularly. You should have one every day, ideally. People with Parkinson's can suffer from constipation prior to and after diagnosis. In fact, up to 60% of people can suffer from constipation. And the reality is that constipation can lead to this little tablet staying in your intestines for too long and not getting absorbed into your bloodstream where they need to get up to your brain. And this can worsen your symptoms. The other reason is because constipation can lead to overgrowth of unhealthy bacteria in your bowel. And this has been associated with worsening of symptoms, but also potentially worsening of progression. So how do you overcome constipation? Well, you need to make sure that you get plenty of fibre in your diet. You need to get plenty of fruit, like this, and your vegetables. The reason being that these foods contain lots of what we call soluble fibre. And soluble fibre creates a kind of gel in your stool, which helps it to move more easily through the bowel. You can also get soluble fibre through your oats and things like your pulses, your chickpeas and your kidney beans and your lentils. You also need to have insoluble fibre, which is basically what you get from whole grain foods like whole grain rice, pastas and breads, and things like bulgur wheat, buckwheat, and different types of grains. It's like nature's natural broom. It helps give you the roughage to move the stool through your bowel. You need to be able to get 25 to 30 grams of fibre in your diet, and that's why you need plenty of these fibre-rich foods. You need to make sure that your plate your meals are made up of 50% of vegetables, and that you eat plenty of fruit during the day as snacks, or maybe put on your cereals or into your salads to help you meet your fiber requirements. Which brings me on to top tip number 4, which is basically making sure that you get enough fluid. So you need to be getting 8 to 10 glasses of fluid a day. One of the main reasons is to keep yourself hydrated, because you want to keep the bowel hydrated to help all that fiber move through your bowel. There's no point in having lots of fiber if you don't have enough fluid to soften it up to make it easier to pass a bowel movement. So make sure you take at least 200 mils of water, or it could be fizzy water, with your tablets. And that will help also to make the tablet wash down into your stomach. The other reason you want to take plenty of fluid is for those of you who suffer from orthostatic hypotension. That's low blood pressure that can cause dizzy spells. So making sure that you have plenty of fluid helps to keep your blood pressure up. You might need other things like adding a little bit of salt in if you have orthostatic hypotension to your meals, because this can help to draw fluid into your body and help to raise your blood pressure. But you need to speak to your team and your dietitian if you have orthostatic hypotension. The next tip is basically make sure that you weigh yourself regularly, because unfortunately as the disease progresses, we can lose weight. And weight loss can lead to weakening of muscles and falls. It can lead to worsening of symptoms and potentially progression. So you need to keep an eye on your weight, because the other reason is dyskinesias, where you shake, or dystonias with the sort of stiff muscles, or rigidity or tremors can burn up a lot of energy. And this can lead to a lot of weight loss. And as I mentioned, weight loss then can worsen your symptoms. You need to make sure they're eating an awful lot of energy to match the output that you burn up from all of these symptoms. And that is why a lot of people prior to DBS can lose a lot of weight, because of their dyskinesias. But when they get deep brain stimulation, a lot of these symptoms basically are dampened. So the energy output is not as great. So people can actually gain a lot of weight post DBS. And that is fine if it keeps you within a normal weight. But if your weight gets too high, that can also impede your Parkinson's from being well managed. The other thing is, if you take things like agonists, like Requip, you can develop things called impulse control disorders, which are things like excess gambling or shopping. But it can also lead to excess eating or binge eating. These things are not to be ashamed of, but you do need to let your team know about them so they can deal with it. My next top tip is to make sure that you get certain bloods checked, and that would be things like your vitamin D. So a lot of people with Parkinson's are deficient in vitamin D or low in vitamin D. And vitamin D is very important to keep your bones strong. Also, vitamin D has been indicated in research to possibly be associated with Parkinson's. So it's very important to keep your vitamin D levels topped up. So check your vitamin D with your team. The other thing is your vitamin B12. So your vitamin B12 can be low because of a number of reasons. One is the long you're on levodopa can interfere with vitamin B12 absorption. Also, things like constipation can cause vitamin B12 issues. And also, if you are an older person with Parkinson's, sometimes we have problems when we're older with absorbing our vitamin B12. And if you're vegan, you will not get enough vitamin B12. So it's very important to get it checked, because vitamin B12 deficiency can lead to things like depression, cognitive problems, weak muscles, imbalance on your legs, and also things like neuropathies, which is kind of tingling around your extremities. A lot of these symptoms are similar to Parkinson's symptoms. So you might think that you're actually progressing when actually it's really to do with the fact that you have low vitamin B12. So my next tip is to make sure that you get a DEXA bone scan upon diagnosis. And this is to check whether you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, because a lot of people with Parkinson's have this condition, which is called brittle bones. And the issue with this is if you fall and break a bone, it can stop you from exercising, and exercising helps to slow progression. And also, if you end up in hospital with a fractured hip, it can lead to a whole load of other issues, which will end up causing your symptoms to be worse. So it leads me on then to my next tip, which is to eat like a Mediterranean with a dash of the Far East. So that is basically a Mediterranean diet has been shown to reduce the risk of developing Parkinson's disease. And a diet called the Mediterranean Dash diet that was in one particular study with older people actually showed that potentially it could slow progression. So making sure in terms of Mediterranean diet is that you get plenty of your vegetables and fruit. And what is really important is that you get plenty of colour into your diet. So your reds and your purples and also your green vegetables. Your Mediterranean diet also has a lot of what we call olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. So putting that in your salads or taking a couple of teaspoons in the day, and also getting it from foods like olives and avocado, and also from nuts like your walnuts and your almonds. Also to eat oily fish like salmon, mackerel and trout is a really important part of the Mediterranean diet. And then getting some herbs and spices in, which basically will help with a lot of people with Parkinson who have smell and taste issues. So it's a bit like people with cancer. When you add in these spices and herbs, it helps to make the food more interesting to eat. And also, there is some research to show that they may have impact in terms of progression. My next tip is to make sure you get enough vitamin C. And that's obviously from your fruit and veg, but I actually mean vitamin Connect. And that it has been shown that people who are more lonely and isolated tend to have worse symptoms and progress quicker. One of the things about Parkinson's is the lack of dopamine leads to things like apathy, lack of motivation, and low mood. And this can affect your ability to actually eat better for yourself to help manage your Parkinson's. So make sure you link with your team to get those symptoms dealt with. And also connect with friends and family to encourage you to eat more and eat more healthily. And my last top tip, number 10, is basically ask for referral to a dietitian. Because as they say, when you meet one person with Parkinson's, you meet one person with Parkinson's. And a dietitian will work with you individually based on your symptoms, the medication you're on, what supplements you're on, what your lifestyle is like, what your exercise is like, what foods you like, and what your wishes are to help you live an optimal life with Parkinson's. Thank you very much for listening. I have uploaded some resources on the website and I look forward to answering your questions tomorrow.